I'm Eric Trommater,
I'm Erin Brown.
And I am Sila Blume.
and this is World Cinema History. This week, Siren of the Desert, 1965, directed by Luis Buñuel.
Yeah, this was the first one of his films that I've seen. And to be honest, I really hadn't. I'd heard the name. I hadn't seen anything. I hadn't heard anything about him. So I don't think my opinion really changed. It's like now I've seen this film. So I know who he is now. And honestly, it's a very odd film. So yeah.
And Buñuel is a very, very odd man. He has a reputation, Buñuel the sadist, the man who started his career by cutting a woman's eye open with a razor in On Chien and Below. We think of Buñuel, the so-called I'm an atheist, thank God fellow, the apostate, the anti-cleric, the iconoclast. But this is kind of a in-between film, between the sort of light-hearted French bourgeois comedies he made in his late 60s and early 70s, and the heavier melodramas tinged with surrealist humor that he made in Mexico and including Viridiana in Spain. This in 1965 was the last film he would make in Mexico before making the rest of his films either in French or one film, Tristiana, in Spanish. The other word that Buñuel gets filed under is, of course, surrealism, because he was there at the beginning when Andre Breton created the Surrealist Manifesto, and his first film was Salvador Dali on Chien and Below, and his second film without Dali, L'Age d'Or, are both considered touchstones of the Surrealist movement. But I don't really cotton to pigeonholing him as the surrealist director. And I hate to say this out loud, but the reason why is because to me, so much of what gets classified as surrealist work is mediocre at best. I can classify, for instance, Dali as both being a surrealist and a genius. But let's name a great just as an example who we can definitely classify as a surrealist, but was he technically a very good painter?
That is a very complex wave of thoughts. I will say, firstly, to the conceptual terminology of surrealism, André Breton, according to what I know, made it very specific that surrealism is based on dreams and not on reality. The second thing I will say is René Magritte, I believe to have been a very interesting character who was dealing with some psychological weirdness in his life, and he decided to put that into painting. I don't think he's a good painter. I don't think he does an excellent job in connecting psychology and painting. And I don't really see him at all as a surrealist. I cannot explain that very well, but I just don't see that vein that is very clear in Salvador Dali. For me, the ones we're talking about, to me, he's number one in terms of being able to show surrealism in his work and to see that there's a very tight connection between what surrealism was for Breton and what Dali was actually really and honestly trying to do.
Let's get into how Andre Breton created the Surrealist movement. The quote that kind of set it off from his Surrealist Manifesto: psychic automatism in its pure state, by which one proposes to express verbally, by means of written word or any other manner, the actual functioning of thought, dictated thought in the absence of any control exercised by reason, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern. And so surrealism was more than just a visual arts movement. It meant to encompass poetry. But now, of course, the word has just kind of come to mean odd or weird. David Lynch is considered a surrealist. Of course, he had some influence from surrealists. And so the word has kind of come to lose its meaning.
Well, I think it gets a little bit difficult addressing surrealism because, after what you just said, I understand surrealism as two possibilities. One is the end aesthetic of what's being presented, or number two, the intention and the motor, not the expression, but the expression and the motor behind surrealism, namely how you explained what Breton said, and on the other hand, that it comes from dreams, which is a specific point that he put to Dali about his work. Yours is real surrealism because it comes from dreams. So for me, there are two different things you're addressing right now. One is the aesthetic result, and the other one is where is this coming from for it to be called surrealism?
As opposed to a movement that started as a reaction to World War One and as a reaction to Dadaism, which was literally trying to tear down all of art because it was saying the logic of art had created the hell of the present day. Let's look at surrealism as one of the tools, perhaps, that Buñuel has used. And here I'm going to play a clip by the director Wes Anderson, in which he goes over something that the director Mike Nichols said about Luis Buñuel.
I remember reading this article in the New York Times. It was Mike Nichols talking about making movies. And in it, he says a thing that you would not expect Mike Nichols to say, that he says when he's working every day at some point, he thinks of Buñuel, that this is this director who, when faced with a problem, goes to his subconscious and he always can discover his solution somewhere in his imagination, which combines all his experiences, and his voice allows him this kind of reservoir of something or another. I sort of feel I kind of aspire to that. I like the idea of, when I'm writing, I feel the most improvisational part of making a movie for me is writing the script. It's when you have this moment where it doesn't exist, nothing exists, and it's either happens or it doesn't and goes on to the page. And I often think of Buñuel. It's not exactly Ionesco, but it's sort of in the same vein, that I wanted to have mystery, and I like when I'm working on something where I don't quite understand it and it reveals itself to me as we go along, or it doesn't.
Here is why I think surrealism kind of failed on a non-visual basis, just to an audience like myself. To me, there is nothing more boring than hearing someone else tell me about their dream. And that, I think, in the written medium is what a lot of surrealism is.
The Andalusian dog is very, very, very much surrealism. Just like I would say Eraserhead by Lynch is very much surrealism. Simon of the Desert, for me, has nothing to do with surrealism because the weirdness in it has to do a lot with the historical context to Catholicism and evil that he took from Simon of the real the real Simon. Let's not forget, we are listening to a Spanish person. The Spaniards, in their art, in their architecture, in their writing, are very, very particular individuals because they're Spaniards.
Let's talk about this real fellow, this Saint Simon of Stilites. He was born in or around 388. Tried to enter a monastery around 405 to 407, and was told he had too strict a regiment of asceticism. He was lacerating his flesh constantly with a palm leaf belt, and he's starting to smell bad because he refused to bathe, and so he was pretty much kicked out of the monastery. Decided that he was going to make it all the way through Lent without eating anything. Attracted a ton of attention by going 40 days and 40 nights without any food, despite the fact that the head of the monastery had sent 10 rolls and 10 jugs of water just as emergency rations. He locked himself into basically a cave for 40 days and 40 nights, and when they opened it up, he was passed out eating anything. Attracted a ton of attention by going 40 days and 40 nights without any food, despite the fact that the head of the monastery had sent 10 rolls and 10 jugs of water just as emergency rations. He locked himself into basically a cave for 40 days and 40 nights, and when they opened it up, he was passed out, but he had survived all 40 days, and all 10 rolls and 10 jugs of water had been completely untouched. And this made him a bit of a religious celebrity in Syria, outside Aleppo. He attracted a bunch of followers, but he was a humble man and wanted to live in prayer, and the constant crowd of followers was distracting him from his prayers and his communication with God. And so, sometime between 420 and 424, he ascended a pillar that was approximately 21, 22 feet high as a way of getting far enough away from the crowd and close enough to God to conduct his private prayers. And as Luis Buñuel's film begins, he's been on that pillar for 6 years. And the appreciation for him as an example, as an ascete, as he sat day and night without going anywhere in prayer for 6 years, one of the wealthy people of the area of what is now Aleppo built for him a much taller pillar and has gifted to him as a present. And as the film begins, she's taking up residency in his new pillar. And on the way there, he sees his mother, the future Saint Martha, who is dying and just wants to spend her dying days in Simon's presence. And Simon says, Jesus told us all to abandon our family and follow him. And so I have to turn my back on you. Whether Simon really said it, but it is something that was attributed to him at the time. Mother, if we are deserving, we will meet again in heaven. And that is how the film begins. Erin, what were your thoughts on this? I guess you said you viewed it twice because you needed a second viewing. I assume you've got something a little deeper than what the fuck did I just watch, which is of course what you texted me after you've watched it the first time.
Yeah. um, yeah, I still maintain that's how I feel about it. But yeah, I got more out of it the second time. I didn't realize it was supposed to be funny the first time through. So I was laughing at it like, why did they do this? Not realizing that it was done on purpose. But it was also, God, it was weird. It was such a weird film. It's very weird to watch something and not realize it's supposed to be funny. And you just wonder, why is there a coffin sliding through the desert? Why did they just blow up that toad? um, which I still don't know why they blew up that toad. I don't understand that bit at all.
He had it coming. Did you see him the way he was looking? That toad was. It was just that toad was
It
just
was,
bad news.
it was an evil toad, man. That was the most evil of the
Now, that
toad.
if you are legitimately asking why they blew up the toad,
I am,
it
yeah.
is. It was considered that you could transfer the evil of someone who was possessed into a frog, and if you killed the frog, the evil would die with them. So
Oh, okay.
that's what that was about, which
Oh, weird.
goes to Buñuel's very deep knowledge of Catholic lore that comes into play for a lot of the jokes in this.
See, I think that's why I didn't get a lot of it. I was not raised Catholic. Yeah, the religious part of my family is extremely Baptist. So I didn't learn a lot about Catholicism, so there were things I didn't catch because of that. Also, I'm not Spanish. So Sila's point about, Buñuel made this as a Spaniard and this is how, this is their viewpoint. See, that's another thing that was lost on me because, like most Americans, this is almost the only place I've been in the world, which is unfortunate, I gotta say. There were a lot of things that I was just kind of wondering about, like why the goat herd? Was that why did they choose that particular actor? Because of the era that it was filmed, I'm a little leery that we were supposed to laugh at the guy and the way he walked, but I don't know.
Erin, the past is a different country. They did things differently there. Buñuel
Yeah.
always had dwarfs. Well, they were called dwarfs back then. Now I guess they're called little people, and they always symbolized his anger at God for creating an imperfect world and especially an imperfect humanity. The dwarf is always there as a reminder that God is either imperfect and thus not God, or God didn't create mankind and thus there is no God. Cruel now.
Yeah.
By our today's standards. This is the man who began his career by slicing a woman's eye open with a razor. Buñuel was a sadist. He was not concerned with hurting anyone's feelings. As a matter of fact, I think he'd be glad we were having this conversation all these years later.
What was Buñuel's stand on God? Not the Catholic Church, but on God, because there's something that he uses at the beginning, which is a biblical aspect or mythology or fact when it comes to the scriptures, as we know the Bible. It starts by this religious leader saying, "We come to you, and you have been here 6 years, 6 months, 6 days." And that is a very, very crucial beginning, because that is, even though it's not said, but that is obviously the 666, which is according to the Bible, not according to the
Sign of
Catholicism,
the
but
beast.
correct. So why is he starting with this? This does not apply to Simon or Simon. This applies to something else, but I don't know what Buñuel is trying to do with this. I'm not using that as a criticism. I'm not using that as a matter of fact in terms of the philosophy or the direction the movie is supposed to take. I just find interesting how he uses that at that point and then makes it weaker as a point when he later on uses the devil, referring to "you have been here 8 years, 8 months, 8 days," which takes away the validity or the symbolism of the 666, because now we have 888.
Because the Hebrew alphabet assigns a number to each letter in a word. So 666 in Hebrew would be the letters for Nero. So 666 was referring to Nero, who was the emperor of Rome at the time that Revelations was written. 888, on the other hand, is the Hebrew equivalent of the end of everything, or the apocalypse. And
Okay,
so that's why he chose those two numbers.
okay, that helps me a lot in not understanding, but gaining a little bit different
I don't think
perspective.
you're
As
supposed to understand.
yes, yes, he's just throwing something at us, and it's up to us to go into it and study it to see what we could do with it. Not necessarily understand it, but what can I do with this? Especially, and hope I'm not getting ahead of ourselves, when he just then at the end uses the devil to say, "And you stay here until the end." So there's a lot of comedy and humor going on in terms of what his point might be against the church or about God or about his life. But I find very interesting how he's playing around with this time and in these connections of symbolism.
Well, and
Um,
there's nothing surreal about it, is there? There's nothing dreamlike. There's nothing subconscious. There's nothing
Correct.
Freudian. I'm going to go back to that clip that I played about the process. And so instead of looking at surrealism and Buñuel as being parts of a movement, and every work of Buñuel being a part of surrealism, how about we look at the surrealism as just one of many techniques that this technically excellent filmmaker used to create this, because of course he not only directed it, but he wrote the screenplay.
I figured something out listening to this, listening to you guys talk about it. And this is probably everybody already knows this, but it's about the end of the world. Dang it, I just figured that out. So it starts with 666, and you said that's the beginning of the end. And then there's the 888, which is the end of everything. At one point, the monk that was looking at the female Satan that he told to go away until he could control himself. You know what I'm talking about? Anyway. He said the
The one
forces
who
of the
comes back at the end for forgiveness.
Exactly, yeah, that guy. He says the forces of the Antichrist are moving on the Pope. And then the coffin comes sliding across. I took it as he died and went to hell, and hell is a 60s nightclub.
En nada. ¿Cómo se llama ese baile?
Carne radioactiva. Es el último baile, el baile final. Es el baile final.
Va de retro.
Va de ultra.
You know, it makes a lot more sense that they're all in there dancing to the radioactive flesh, and they're in America, and America dropped the bomb and destroyed the world, and it's the apocalypse. I just figured that out, and probably everybody else already figured it out before me. But
Erin, that's one of many answers.
Oh, good.
This is a phrase you're going to hear a lot from me as we talk about filmmakers, especially European filmmakers. You're not wrong. Doesn't mean you're right, but you're not wrong.
I'd like to be right. Maybe I'm partially right.
Well, you know, we all would like to be right, but unfortunately, ambiguity is the ally of these directors, and they're never going to explain any of this to us because, of course, that would spoil our fun. We can't have our little conspiracy talks about what 666 and 888 means. If Luis Buñuel put out something saying, oh, this is what I meant by this, and this is what I meant by that. And so, of course, Luis Buñuel gives the answer that he should give, which is, there's no symbology in my film, just enjoy it as a comedy.
Okay.
Go to hell.
I also realized something. This is not the first Luis Buñuel film I've seen. I didn't realize Belle de Jour was one of his. And so, yeah, I saw that a very long time ago. And I just remembered because you talked about ambiguity. That has an ambiguous ending as well.
Michel Piccoli either is completely cured by hearing that his wife was a prostitute, or his wife dreams that he's completely cured of both blindness and being crippled. Very typical Buñuel ending.
Yeah. I think it's funny that I watched that in my French class in high school. My French teacher was like, this is a good thing to show to our teenagers.
Buñuel had, in his autobiography, said that around the time he made Belle de Jour, he had reached the age, he said, that blessed age where the last bit of any sexual desire had drained from my body, and I've been grateful for it ever since. Belle de Jour is a perfect example of a film that is about an incredibly erotic subject that has absolutely not one erotic scene in it. Not something you're going to take a date to get them hot, which I think is the ultimate prank that he pulled.
That's pretty clever.
Perditum ducas tu preterones une decapilati cuniculose Sirie Fili Simeone opagaquem vanum patis barba even Syria deprecatus urina.
In these characters of his, he may be making fun of religion in answer to your question, and yet all of his religious figures, whether it's Viridiana, whether it's Nazarene, whether it's Simon here, whether it's the later Tristiana, they're not hypocrites. They're not evil. They are godly people and attempting to serve God, and are generally brought down by the more profane and earthly elements who can't live up to their standards. And so back to your question of what was Buñuel's stance on religion, I wonder if maybe it wasn't a disappointment in humanity that he was funneling through his religion. Now, we do know he was anti-Catholic, but his famous statement, "I'm an atheist, thank God," was something he claimed for the rest of his life to have regretted saying. And he said, every time someone brings up that I said that, I want to clobber them in the head. I'm not that simple a man, and my thoughts on God are not that simple.
The artist, in my opinion, is not there to say to you, I give you something to learn by. But I think the artist or specific artists, and to me, they are usually the best ones, they are instigating you to wonder, to ponder upon what I'm saying. Not to learn about it, but just to look at it again or again and again, not because I showed it to you, but because you are seeing it perhaps in a different way now, and you will learn based on what you can learn, not based on what I'm teaching you. What is the intention, which goes to your point or to your question? What am I intending with this film, or with this point, or with this comedy, or with this satirical statement? In the same way that Ian Anderson wrote in Aqualon, in the beginning was man, and man created God. When I read that the first time, I was thinking, well, Ian Anderson is obviously an atheist. But that's only one way of looking at it. He, in my opinion, was actually instigating me and the reader to think about what is our dependence upon, what is God's dependence when it comes to us, and just to question the way we're looking at things. And in this film, I think he's dealing a lot with a personal thing that he's trying to deal with. And by doing that, he happens to be using things we know as surrealism, things we know as cinema, even though I think in terms of cinema, he didn't go very far, maybe because that's his language. But I don't see a lot of cinema in this film. I just see a study as to what
Well,
is...
and that's what Buñuel does best. Is
yes,
disguise his hand.
yes,
He is the disguised genius. You know who thought of Buñuel very, very highly, though? Ingmar Bergman ranked him as one of the best of all directors. Alfred Hitchcock actually called him, and I quote, the greatest of all of us. To Sila's point, Alfred Hitchcock said he was simple as opposed to, and I quote, films where the flowers are out of focus and in the foreground. But then when Dolly and Alfred Hitchcock worked together, Dolly confessed that he didn't think that Alfred Hitchcock actually meant to hire him. He said, I think what he wanted for the spellbound dream sequence was Luis Buñuel, and he confused the two of us because both of our names are on Chien and Low. They did actually meet, Alfred Hitchcock and Luis Buñuel, at a party in 1972 when Buñuel was in California, because Discreet Charm of the Bourgeois was nominated for Best Foreign Picture. And this is a quote from his biography, My Last Sigh. At one point during my conversation with John Ford, we heard footsteps shuffling behind us, and when I turned around, there was Alfred Hitchcock, round and rosy-cheeked, his arms held out in my direction. I'd never met him either, but knew that he'd sung my praises from time to time. He sat down on the other side of me, and one arm around my shoulders, he proceeded to talk nonstop about his wine cellar, his diet, and the amputated leg in Tristiana. Ah, that leg, he sighed once more. Ah, that leg.
I'm not being guided by cinematography. I'm being guided by the wonder of miracle, by the wonder of mythology, by the wonder of godliness and spirituality that transforms, and then you have the two different powers of God and the devil fighting each other.
let's talk about the lack of sentimentality. For instance, the man whose hands were chopped off for stealing, Simon restores them, and his very first act with his newly restored hands is to shove his child in the back. In between, we cut to two men who were like, "Hey, did you see that? He restored that hand." And the second man says, "Yeah, you got any more bread? Give me a bit." And I think that's what Buñuel does best. And if you had to describe Buñuel in one scene, I think that would be the best way to describe it, which is zero sentimentality. You have the joke, the setup, then the punchline, and at no time during that is there any time for you to sit back and say, "Oh wow," or "Oh, I feel sorry for so and so," because he's on to the next joke. And that's why I think Simon of the Desert is his masterpiece, because having only to fill 45 minutes, it's all just the best bits. And to me, it's kind of like a portable Buñuel in that way, where you have 45 straight minutes of just exactly what Buñuel does best.
This is silly. That scene with the hands being cut off and everybody being unimpressed, that led to one of my favorite notes that I took my first time through, which is, "I'm holy and y'all are dicks." Those are the kind of notes I took watching this film.
I see a lot of what we usually refer to as black or British humor. The man doesn't spend a fraction of a second thanking Simon. He doesn't even look at him. He just tells the wife, "Let's go."
That goes to where I find Buñuel a genius as a writer. You ask yourself, well, what kind of a guy was he? And why was his hand, why were his, and
Correct.
we know
Correct.
his hands.
That's insinuated. Something has been insinuated about how that would happen. I think Simon is asking the question, there's something hidden that makes him not deserve to get the hands back. But it really, he doesn't even appear surprised that he got his hands back. He's just okay, let's go. It's so funny.
Yeah, they cut his hands off for stealing. Probably wasn't like stealing a loaf of bread to feed his family kind of a thing. I think that's what the implication was. He was kind of a dick and hoping to get something, and then once he had it, he didn't care anymore.
And he becomes so impatient with his daughter for asking, "Hey, were those your original hands?" that he can't control himself from hitting her right away. And it's the first act
Yeah,
that
that
he
kind of
commits
pissed me off.
with those
Yeah.
hands. Yeah, but
So
it's
That kind of pissed me off
hilarious.
because
But it's funnier than hell. It's black, it's dark, but it's funnier than hell.
So again, he is being funny, but typical Buñuel meet Land Without Bread, and also a few other artists in this time, they are actually criticizing not so much God, but how we believe in God. He's criticizing how hypocritical we are being. He's not attacking God so much as he is addressing how we behave, how bad we are, and that has nothing to do with God. It has to do with us.
Yeah, it's like in The Life of Brian, when they were worshiping the shoe or the gourd. It's like they wanted to worship something and they didn't want to think too hard about it.
He has given us a sign. Oh, he has given us a shoe. The shoe is the sign. Let us follow his example. What? Let us, like him, hold up one shoe and let the other be upon our foot, for this is his sign that all who follow him shall do likewise. Yes. No, the shoe is a sign that we must gather shoes together in abundance.
Cast off the shoes, follow the gourd!
No, let us gather shoes together. Let me.
No, it is a sign that, like him, we must think not of the things of the body, but of the face and head.
Give me your shoe.
Get off!
Follow the gourd, the holy gourd of Jerusalem!
The gourd! Hold up the sandal as he has commanded us. It is a shoe! It's a sandal! No, it is not a shoe!
Cast it away!
Put it on!
Clear off!
Take the shoes and follow him!
Stop!
Let us
let us flatter. Yea, he cometh to us like the seed of the grave.
Well, and it goes back to Orson Welles' quote, Luis Buñuel hates God as only a true Christian can. And it also goes to the idea, and this is a line from his autobiography, which is that if man created God, then I hate them too. Then we move on to the devil's actual temptations of Simon, and she begins dressed as a schoolgirl with a hoop, singing that song, showing her stockings and garter belts, a fetish of Buñuel's that shows up in pretty much all of his films from L'Âge d'Or onwards, except for obvious reasons, La Huertas, since it took place in the poorest part of Spain where they couldn't have afforded such nicety, or I'm positive Buñuel would have found a way to wedge it in there as well, as he found a way to wedge it into his adaptation of Wuthering Heights somehow. He had his fetishes for feet and for legs, and we get that, and then she exposes her boobs to him. And of course, this goes back again to the past being a different country, because that is such a cliche. The devil as woman, the devil as temptress, or what have you. And just at that moment where you're like, oh, come on, Luis, you're better than this. You get her ending of that song where she's talking about him, brushing his teeth in Syrian urine, or you realize she's not there to seduce him, that she just chose that for her own amusement and for her own fun. Simon makes the sign of the cross. She tries to stop him. She can't, and she's transformed into an ugly ogre. And at that moment, we realize all of this was in Simon's imagination.
I was going to actually kind of circle back a little bit to what you said earlier about him being very holy. I'm thinking he's not. He keeps wanting people to get out of his sight if he doesn't like something about them. So, like the monk that watched the woman devil, and he said, "Oh, why are you looking at that one-eyed woman?" He wanted that guy to leave. He didn't want Brother Matthias to be around him without a beard, and he wanted him to be dirty. He didn't want him to wear clean clothes and be clean shaven. I think that the devil tempting him was just a visual showing of his pride, of his. And at the end, I originally interpreted that as he went to hell for the sin of pride, because he was so, I am the most holy, I am the most pious, to the point of mental illness. Like a lot of his, there's a thing called scrupulosity that a lot of religious people with OCD deal with. Where am I holy enough? Am I being good enough? Am I being Christian enough? And it felt like his was an extreme version of that. So it was a combination of pride and mental illness. And whether the devil was there or not, it was a symptom of his pride more than anything else.
Yeah, and of course in the next scene, you've got him sitting around blessing just about everything that he can, and picks a piece of food out of his mouth, and he's about to bless it, and then he's like, oh, and that great bit of physical comedy where he what am I doing? But he even says, there's no harm to it, and it makes me feel good, So he blesses a bug, and he blesses and he blesses the sky for not raining on him, and he blesses the dirt. I think Buñuel is playing into exactly that mental disorder. How did you pronounce it again, Erin?
Scrupulosity.
I hadn't given it any thought, but those scenes really do kind of tie in together, and it really makes the ending make a lot more sense then. But I'm not going to go and say that Buñuel is so transparent that we can just write the whole entire film off as a dream or all in Simon's head. It's not that simple. Because whether or not this is Simon imagining it, the devil is just as real to him and is just as real to us as viewers, I believe, as if it were an animal attacking Simon.
Yeah, and the goat herd said the devil is in this area. The devil walks these hills, or whatever it was that he said. So it wasn't just his imagination; it was something.
Well, and it's curdling the goat's milk. Again, that's real. And the young monk that gets banished for not being able to grow his whiskers, part of that is because of Simon's, like, he's too young to be around. If the devil's going to be here, he's going to be tempted because he's just too young and inexperienced. And but one of the great throwaway lines after the goat herder is showing the goat's teats. He says, be careful how you play with your animals. The devil's out here at night, which is hilarious because he's
That,
implying, of course.
that was really on the borderline. For me, this film has a little bit too much, not in a negative sense, but maybe one of the things he was trying to do is address how much we are dependent on symbols and idolatry, and we think we are following God, but we're not. We're following the idea of following God.
Yeah, I was going to say that makes a lot of sense. The idea of following God more than actually following God. We see a lot of that, honestly, now. When I look at my very
Yes,
religious family,
yes.
that's what they're doing, is they're not following what the Bible actually says about being kind to people. They're following what they think they want it to be. And it's not at all the same thing.
Well, isn't that what Jesus came to do? Was get us to stop following the letter of the law and to follow the spirit of the law?
Exactly. They're acting like the Pharisees. They're hypocrites. They're the vessel that's clean on the outside but dirty on the inside. That's what they're doing, and it's infuriating.
Well, Luke 6:27. I say unto you, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other. That is what Jesus's message is. And that, in a way, is what Simon's message is. And in the real life Simon, the way they tested him was that the high monks sent a message saying, we order you to get off of that pillar. And it was a test, because if he refused to get off the pillar, then he was doing it out of pride. But if he followed their directions, then he obviously was humble. And Simon started getting off the pillar. And they said, no, no, go back. It was a test, and you passed. In the film, we see in a scene that was kind of hinted at earlier by Erin, where the priest who he had been cast out by Simon for placing an eye on Silvia Pinal at the beginning of the film comes to ask him for forgiveness, and they have a conversation about the Antichrist overtaking the papacy and Rome, and Simon basically saying that doesn't affect me any, because the quicker that it brings on the end days, the quicker that I can get closer to God. And they talk about how wars start over property, and he says, say this is my bag, and Simon says, well, no, you can have it. And it's like, that's not how it works. You're supposed to say, that's my bag. No, give me back my bag. And so, in a way, in a clumsy, naive way, Simon, without being sentimental, without pathos, Simon, somehow or another, almost like bungles into being so good that the devil has to cheat.
When we see him being, in our eyes, so wonderful in saying, okay, so take it. It's not mine. He doesn't understand that. That is, and this is where you might have to do a cut, that is bullshit. Because how can he have this so neutral detachment from a bag, but he does not understand it when it has to do with his mother? This connection with his mother, he tries to make it a monumental action. I herewith tell you, we cannot be together, and we will see each other in heaven. But with the bag, he has no connection. He doesn't see a need for a connection or disconnection. It just doesn't exist to him. So for me, that is a real example of the problem that Buñuel is trying to address. We're praising being religious. but we are not religious.
And that goes back to Luke 6:27. Anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Let's tie the two scenes together. The scene where the thief gets his hands back, and we realize that the thief probably not deserving of a miracle like that, to the scene where Simon shows his, I don't want to say naivete because that sounds judgmental, but basically his disinterest in property or anything earthly at the end. That again, I think, is something where Buñuel is quite brilliantly drawing us back, because of course, what did Jesus also tell us? You praise me by how you treat the worst of my people. Again, it comes back to love your enemies. The second commandment, do unto others as you want done unto you. And yet Simon is kind of almost an outcast in a way, because in order to live that life.
But these are, in my view, moralistic exercises, and they do not match the moment where he says, I'm not worthy of this. To me, that does not match. To me, on one side, we are being too focused on praising morality and being surprised that he didn't say thank you for the miracle, and we are surprised about him not wanting to be his mother and with his mother, and we are surprised how he's so wonderful that he's able to say, that's not mine, you can take it, it's not really mine, I don't know what mine means. But at the same time, he is unable to reach the point where he doesn't need to say, I am not worthy. Yeah.
What drove him to that pillar in the first place? It is because he considered himself a sinner. Why is he constantly punishing his body? Why did he fast?
Correct.
Why, when he was in the monastery, did he wear the palm leaf belt to deliberately cut his flesh, to remind him of through mortification of flesh, that he is a sinner, that I am a penitent, I am here to humble myself. I don't think he's being haughty, however, and I don't think it's a moment of pride. I don't think it's a break in character or a character flaw when he drives the young monk away for not having his beard. I think he literally is just trying to protect him, because this is not a time to have a novice when the devil is literally walking. Because as we see, Simon, with all his purity and all his giving up of the material world, still loses.
And when you say, I'm not worthy of it, then you have zero right to bless anything. So that, to me, again, it's a very good example of addressing idolatry and getting away from what actually really is godliness and spirituality. He is saying towards the beginning of the film, I'm not worthy of this, but he's walking around blessing things. If you cannot see yourself as worthy, you have no essence in yourself to be able to bless anything.
And that's why that's one of the funnier scenes of the film, is when he catches himself and has that double take where he's about to bless a piece of food just to make himself feel better, because it gives him joy. Because it gives him joy, his penitent heart has to repent for that, because anything that gives him joy, because he is not worthy of, because he is a penitent and a sinner. And yet, again, I never once felt sorry for him despite that. I never once said, poor Simon. Did you, Erin? Was there ever a time where you were like, oh, poor guy?
Not really, no. He seemed to be bringing things on himself. I think he knew what he was doing.
But he is a clumsy character. You know, this is a guy who he originally came to the desert because he wanted to be left alone. And people are like, he wants to be left alone? What a guy. We should follow him. And of course, what film does that remind you of, Erin? And what scene in that film does that remind you of?
Very much Life of Brian. Very
And the
much Life of
writer
Brian. Yep.
and the writer of that scene, Mr. Terry Gilliam,
yeah,
said that he got the idea while watching this exact film. All right, let's talk about the ending. Most controversial part of the film. I defend it. I think it works. I don't think it's just a little one-off joke, because I think the devil has taken him to the end of the world and shown him the destruction of the world. Because if you are Catholic, if you are of, say, my Protestant faith, the Episcopalian faith, all of that nonsense is not scriptural. There is nothing, not a word in the Bible that says Jesus is coming back in 2 weeks, 2 years, 200 years, 2,000 years, and going to just destroy the world. All of that is nonsense. And so I am able to take that with a grain of salt. But there is a Protestant belief that this is that there are prophecies, and I always ask them, quote me where it says that in the Bible, because I've read that book 6 times. Where does it say that? And I never get a proper response. It's always, well, if you read between the lines here. And so I think Buñuel perfectly plays on that by the devil transporting Simon to his version of hell on earth, which would be modern society, right? And then he wants to go home, and she says, nope, there's a new occupant. And he asks what the name of the song is, and she says, the radioactive flesh, by this little mod group playing in a beatnik bar in New York in the 1960s. And she says it's the latest and the last. This film was originally meant to be about 45 minutes long. So you'll hear a story that they just ran out of money, and so Buñuel just kind of threw this ending on. But no, this is actually supposed to be part of a three-part anthology film, like Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow, or Boccaccio 70, or they were very popular in the 1960s, where 3 different directors were going to have Silvia Pinal star in 3 different stories. And the 2 other directors were supposed to be Federico Fellini and the American Jules Danson, who had been blacklisted during the McCarthy hearings, or not during the McCarthy hearings, I'm sorry, but during the Hollywood blacklisting as a communist, and was living at the time in Greece. And both of them agreed to do the film, but they wanted to cast their own wives, as opposed to Pinal. But Pinal's husband was the producer of the film, and he said, absolutely not. However, if you read the actual screenplay, there are some scenes that weren't filmed. There's a scene where where the Emperor of Byzantine comes to visit Simon. That's not in the film. There's a scene where there's a funeral service for Simon's mother, where, and I'm laughing because I can imagine it, where they have to pull the coffin up to the top of the pillar by pulleys so that he can conduct the service over it. And I just imagining how funny that would have been, but probably too expensive to film. And then there's something where before the devil takes him to modern society, he's moved to a 3rd pillar that's out by the seashore, which I doubt very highly was going to end up in the film at all. But those are the only scenes missing. And this ending was Buñuel's original ending. So this idea that you're going to read some places that the film just ran out of money and Buñuel ended it. This was the whole point. The whole point was that she takes him to the end of the earth, and his hell is to have to sit and stay and witness its destruction. Simon, because he is so humble and so good, and blah 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 blah, in a sarcastic way, obviously, because Buñuel is a sarcastic guy and at heart a bit of a sadist. The devil had to cheat to do it.
The first time through, I was like, "What the heck was that?" But it kind of makes a lot more sense now that it's the end of the world, because things were kind of. Wait, what year did this film come out? Was it 1965?
Well, it was made in 1965. It didn't get released in the United States until 1967.
Okay. I know that because of Vietnam, there's a lot of nihilism. My mom told me about, when my brother and I were born, before we were born, she was like wondering if there was any point to bringing kids into such a terrible world. And I think that might have been part of it. Is like, we're at the end of the world. This is modern society, and it sucks. I also feel there's a bit
It's
of hell is
gosh,
at the.
it's it's darn lucky we're not facing anything like that now, isn't it?
I know,
Uh,
right?
uh, Now I
We're
haven't
not
been paying
facing daily
attention to the new.
horrors.
Now I haven't been paying attention to the news from since 2016, but nothing bad happened, right?
Oh no, not at all. You gotta laugh or you're gonna scream. I feel like part of it also was hell is other people. I mean, since he wanted to be alone in the desert, now he's in this incredibly crowded and noisy room. That's ugh. Just sensory issues on my part. I'm like, no, that would be hell for me, for sure. So I think that's a big part of it too. It
And
was
that last
very
shot of him just kind
hmm?
of dejectedly puffing on a pipe
Yeah.
with a hipster beard is the closest I come to feeling sorry for Simon throughout the whole. I don't, but but there's at the moment like, yeah, he didn't deserve that. It does
Yeah.
actually feel worse than condemning his soul to hell. Like, why couldn't you just like do the whole licking his feet with flame thing like you promised? That would have been so much easier.
Well, that's why they didn't. It's like a personalized hell. Send him someplace where he's going to be absolutely freaking miserable forever. you know.
There are certain interpretations that I do not understand. Number one, I don't understand why judge this last scene as hell. I have no I have no way of logically connecting, referencing the film, the development of what's going on, if there is some development, because some things are too abrupt, but I don't see that as hell. Number two, he is not suffering. Smoking a pipe is one of the most exceptional demonstrations of having a good time. Number three, the people around him, even though there's a lot of them, they're having a good time. So I don't understand why that should be where she brings him in a sense of now you get to suffer. So the way I view that ending is actually supporting the absence of God. The conversation I remember on Clubhouse in a completely different room, I remember a man answering the question, how would you feel if at the end you realize that there is no God? The man answered on Clubhouse, he answered, I would be disappointed. And I found that answer very, very telling and very sad, because that means, again, to the point that I made before, that means we are really determined to keep on this mask of symbolatry or symbolism and idolatry, and we don't care about anything else but to be right at the end. And I don't want to have wasted my life preaching or praying to God, and in the end, there's no. I don't. To me, the real approach would be, if I find out there is no God and I practice religiosity for 50 years, I'm happy to find out the truth. I will be relaxed. We also focus on his state, where actually the normal life was not what he was doing, but the people around him. So when she takes him away to New York, into the future, the way I understand it, actually she's affecting the life of those who were depending on him. He just is in another place, which I
Oh,
would
now
say
that's
is
a
not.
great point. That's a great point. So
I
she's
really
not
don't think
punishing
he's
Simon,
suffering
she's
that much.
punishing her follower.
Again, he is not really suffering. He doesn't know what he's listening to. He doesn't know what these people are doing, but he is enjoying his pipe. So he's doing well. I find this character to be extremely useless, extremely irrelevant, which is going back to idolatry and symbolism. He has made a show out of this, even though he has an explanation as to the peace that he achieves, and that's why he moves up. But at the same time, he is making himself a monument by standing above everything else. So he is actually irrelevant. He is trying to make a big deal out of himself, but he's irrelevant. And when he's taken out of that process in this time in the past and brought to the future, except by maybe remembering, what am I supposed to do now? I had such a vision, and I was working so hard on being good for God. Doesn't matter what God is, but
So
I
in a
was
way, the
working
devil's
so
doing him
hard.
a favor.
But right now, I'm not
So
doing
so
anything. So what's the purpose?
so in a way, El Diablo has done Simon a favor. Because she's removed his penitence,
Yes, but for
and
what? Nobody has gained anything. Again, to symbolism and idolatry, we are so
But what was he penitent for? We never see him commit sins
for being a sinner. For being
for
a
being a
sinner.
sinner because you were born a sinner.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you were
So
the
again,
sin his
symbolism and
sin was being
idolatry.
born.
Yeah. So nothing is happening. We are creating these
So
rules and regulations.
here's my question to both of you, and I'm going to start with Erin, and then I'm going to move to Sila. How do you rate this ending compared to the rest of the film? Did it feel like a mistake to end it in this way? Is it too jokey? Is it what for whatever reason, or did it actually work for you as a kind of, if not surreal, but then at least like absurdist bit of humor to end the film? Even though, like most Buñuel films, there's some ambiguity as to what it means.
I think it worked for what he was going for. I mean, he planned it out to be that, and if we're following my, if I'm following what I think, the film was about, and it was the apocalypse, or that he's in hell, it follows. I think it was a weird ending, for sure. I kind of want to. I actually kind of want to watch the film again to see what else I pick up.
And quite luckily, it is uploaded to the World Cinema History YouTube page for all our Apple and Spotify listeners who might want to see the film after hearing us discuss it.
Yeah, that makes it a lot easier to watch. It was a very strange. It was the first time through. The ending was very jarring. Like, why is he going to New York? Why there? But yeah, it makes a lot more sense to me now, I think.
Well, and I don't think we've got an answer for that, but I don't think Buñuel has to give an explanation either. Sila, is the ending the weakest part of this film, do you think? Or does it fit well for you with the rest of the film? Or is it just too ambiguous and too jokey for what's gone before?
For the way I read it, for the way I understand and make references to what I believed and what I believe now, and considering a little bit what I know about Buñuel, I think it is very well done. I think it's a very, again, back to idolatry and symbolism. We expect something, and that's why it's a shock that he goes to New York. But I think it makes a lot of sense that I forgot to say this, that she, by taking him to New York, she's actually doing one single thing. You're sacrificing yourself. You're doing all this. You're rejecting sex, not with me, but you're rejecting certain things because you want to get somewhere. Well, I'll take you somewhere and I will show you nothing comes out of it. So everything you've been doing in the past 888 is for nothing. I'm showing you right now. We landed. We are here now. So everything you did was for the cats.
The future is now, old man. I like that. That's a good interpretation. It's not my interpretation, but it's a very, very, very good one, Sila. All right. Well, before we go, I did want to point out that Luis Buñuel, besides enjoying a good cigar the same way that Sila and I do, was also quite famous for the way he mixed martinis. And I have painstakingly, by watching over and over and over the film Discreet Charm of the Bourgeois, where he gives his own martini recipe, reverse engineered it. And if you are a cigar smoker like myself or Sila, it is absolutely delicious. And so this is my own version of what I call the Buñueltini. It's 2.5 ounces of gin and a half an ounce of dry vermouth, and then you use 2 dashes of either orange or angostura bitters. Fill the glass with the ice, and then you add the vermouth, you add the bitters, stir, and then you strain out all the excess. And here's the key, and this is the part that I only got from watching Discreet Charm of the Bourgeois. You strain it through orange rinds, because of course that gives the extra tang to the bitters, gives it a bit that just that tiny, it takes that clove taste off and gets rid of the taste of the juniper. And then you just and then just get it as cold as you possibly can in your cocktail glass. And then what I do is I add just a half a dash of either Worcestershire sauce or smoke bitters to it, and it is just a wonderful one, and that is the recipe for a Buñueltini. And so if you want to watch a Buñuel film the way Buñuel was directing it, that is how you do it. So
I'm gonna have to try that. That sounds really good. I have to try that now.
Well, you know what? It's so good. I am actually going to paste it into the episode description on both YouTube and on Spotify and Apple.
Awesome.
So all of us can try it. Now, I'm not saying this is the absolute recipe. This is my impression of what it's been completely reverse engineered from hints and clues left over the years. But I have pointed out that Luis Buñuel is my favorite director. So I have has had as much exposure to him as I think anyone. But enjoy it. It is rather tasty. Like I say though, a bit like surrealism, it is just the tech. I'm only attempting to use the technique. The proof is in the pudding. It's always what? In its tasting. And you know what? It is a darn tasty little cocktail. Especially if you, like me, find the worst part of the martini the taste of juniper, because it knocks it completely out. So next week, Erin Brown is going to be hosting, and I am going to be the smartass sidekick. We're going to reverse roles. Erin, tell us what we've got going next week.
We are going to be watching Taika Waititi's film Boy next week. It's one of my favorite films. It's possibly one of Taika's best. I mean, that and Jojo Rabbit, I think, are the top 2, with Hunt for the Wilder People in a very close third. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Boy. It's a beautiful little film about fathers and sons and relationships and being a child.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to your, not only your hosting, but my being able to take a week off and not having to host. I do like to take a vacation once a month, and I really appreciate you providing that for me. Sila,
Yeah,
before we go, do you have any final thoughts on surrealism, Buñuel, Simon of the Desert, or anything, or life in Ecuador?
I'm tempted to make reference to what I see as extremely important, to really make an effort to dissect not just what one reads in a film or a piece of music, but dissect the way one perceives. And I think one of the principal goals of any type of art has a lot to do with that. How vulnerable we perceive, how open we perceive, instead of being determined about what something needs to be, which I think is something Yasi mentioned quite a few weeks ago. To not be so expectant of what we want and what the name Buñuel might say, but to be open enough to question what I thought religion to be, what I thought God to be, what I thought the devil to be, and then to do a mixed drink with that, and especially after conversations like this, just to be able to dissect a piece of work. And I think that's the way we gain more from it. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Sila. Erin, any final thoughts before we end this podcast?
This is another case where you got to keep your mind open because you might like something you didn't like before, just like last week. I didn't know what to make of this film at first, but having watched it a couple of times and now having this discussion, I have a much better appreciation of it. So thank you for the opportunity and the recommendation of the film.
Hey, thanks again, Erin. Looking forward to next week and take over TD and Boy. If you're listening on YouTube, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. And if you're listening on Apple, please take a moment to write us a review. See you all next week and have a great one.
I was really on the borderline.
Well, because he's
don't fuck your
implying.
goats.
Yeah. He's implying. Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. Hey, be careful. This is not the time for goat fucking.
But when is the time for goat fucking? I gotta ask.
Well, not when the double's walking around anyway. But
Eric
I
and
don't
I
know.
do not know that.
I'm sorry, what?
Eric and
if we
I
did,
do not know that. We do not
Okay.
know.
And if we did, we'd
I would
take it
be-
to our graves.
Yeah, I would be concerned if either of you knew that.
Yeah. The rule one of
no-
rule one of club goat fucking is you don't talk about club goat fucking.
I've been in Spain many times, but I'm not Spaniard. I don't know what they're talking about.
This podcast has taken a turn.
That's racist. Anyway, that's getting cut. Anyway, or maybe I'll put it as a Easter egg at the end, like a reward for people who actually listen to the end. The more popular things that I did was that little Easter egg thing I did for the Marvel episode. I didn't realize it was popular because I thought that episode kind of died out. It didn't do as well as I thought. But there were people who wrote me after the Ulysses episode last week saying that they had fast forwarded to the end and were disappointed that I didn't have one.
There's a little town in the Ozarks, and it was settled near a dam, and it had been very, very rainy. And the pastor of the local church knew that a flood was coming, and people were evacuating. And he's like, "No, I'm going to stay here because God's going to save me." And it kept raining and raining, and the town flooded. And he ended up on his roof. And one of his parishioners came by in a boat and said, "Hey, pastor, come get in the boat. We're going to get you out of here." He goes, "No, God will save me." The next day, the water's even higher. He's still on his roof. The parishioner comes by again on his boat saying, "Pastor, come on, we got to get you out of here." So the parishioner comes by the second day and says, "Pastor, we got to get you out of here. It's going to flood. The dam's about to break. We can't have you, get killed. You're our religious leader." He says, "No, God will save me." Third day comes, parishioner comes by again and says, "Listen, Pastor, we got to get you out of here. I can't come back. This is the last time I can come get you. You better come with us." He's like, "No, God will save me." Well, the fourth day, the dam breaks, washes away the whole town, including the pastor. And the pastor gets up to the pearly gates and meets God and says, "God, I thought you were going to save me. What happened? And God said, well, I sent a boat 3 times.
Symbolism.
Symbolism.
Yeah.
So there you
I
go.
like
That's what
the
this meme.
I like the meme that's going around of the guy. He's walking along a beach with Jesus, and he says, "Yeah, you know, I look back, and every time things are going well, I see 2 sets of footsteps." And Jesus says, "Well, that's because when things were going well, I was with you." And he says, "But when things were going badly, I only see 1 set of footsteps." And Jesus said, "That's because I was riding you like a horse." Whoopee! And it shows him, "Giddy up!"
Wow.
You see, that's where the Christian turns that around and says, "That's the moment I was carrying you."
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
you
that's where it
expect.
came from. Yeah.
That's the calendar version, right?
Yeah.
The calendar quote version. Yeah. So no, I was right. I was writing you.
That's awesome.
And the other one I really like is man is talking to his wife, and he says, "Hey, I baked you a pie." And she says, "We don't own an oven. I baked you a pie. We don't have any of the ingredients. God gave them to me." And she said, "God gave you the ingredients and allowed you to bake a pie." She said, "You see how that sounds, Mary?"
I've been
Uh,
listening to a few jokes lately, a little bit too often. And one of the ones that I found interesting, although not nice, is the woman is in the kitchen. The husband approaches her. I think it's a German production, and he says to her, "When did I tell you? Have I ever told you I love your cooking?" And she looks at him almost a little bit surprised and says, "No, you haven't." And he says, "So why are you cooking?"
oh man. That does sound very German.
A lady was on a date, and one of those internet dating sites, and the guy decides to take her home, and she goes and sees his bedroom, and it's got this whole wall of teddy bears, and he seems to her like a very masculine guy to have all these teddy bears. And she looks, and they're very carefully organized. The bottom shelf is all small bears, and then the medium bears are all on the second shelf, and on the top shelf are all the really big overstuffed bears. And she's like, "Oh, so he's got a a soft side. Wow, anybody who loves teddy bears can't be all that bad." And they, one thing leads to another, and they make love. And she said, "Look, I have to ask, what's with all the teddy bears?" And he says, "Well, you can select any bear that you want off the second shelf because that's your prize."
I'm sorry, can you repeat that ending?
Yeah, I don't get
You
that.
you can select any bear that you want. That's your prize after they've made love. All right, I'll cut that. I guess it's
Okay.
skeet shooting. It's skeet shooting at a fair. You win a teddy bear.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. I guess it doesn't work.
I'm
I
sorry.
maybe it's because maybe I grew up in a different environment. I got it right away, but damn. All right, damn, we'll cut it. That's fine. That's fine. We got more than enough for an Easter egg. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you, Sila.
Huh?
Hopefully, your schedule works out. We can see you next week. Boy, is a very easy film to find. It's on Amazon. It's
Well,
on where else?
I'm not. I keep hearing "boy." I can only think of Kitano's film "Boy," but I'm sure that's not the same
No,
film.
it's a
That's
2010.
different.
This is
Oh,
2010, and the director is Taika Waititi. He's also the star.
oh,
Yeah,
that's
he directed
also Japanese. Sunday I will be
That's
traveling
motive.
from Quito to Macas, so I don't think I will be here.
Oh well,
Okay.
that's fine. That's fine. I haven't decided what we're doing the week after that. I'm trying to stall my Stanley Kaufman as long as possible because I need more time for research. I'm not unfortunately satisfied with what I've got for notes, and so I keep stalling it. So we may rip the Band-Aid off and start my Stanley Kaufman the week after that, but I'll let you know. But enjoy your trip. Enjoy your trip. Erin, thanks for
Thank you.
being here.
Thanks for having me.
Sila, oh well, hey, the show would be boring without at least somebody to talk to, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm really looking forward to what you do next week. I'll send you both a copy of this as soon as I've got it. I've got it up and on the internet. It'll definitely be ready by Tuesday. Usually takes me about a day to edit. So all right,
Awesome. Thank you.
and when I hit the leave button, everybody just kind of just vanishes. So we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks again.
All
Bye
right.
now.
Take care.
Yeah.